Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read-along podcast, in which I, your host Tyler, reassure you week after week that things will happen. And this week, Greg, things happened. It's an odd week for me because I do feel like it's a chapter when things happen, so we won't have much to say. But on the other hand, what happened was people talking in mostly full rooms. How did you feel about these chapters, which we can now name because we have read the first of them? If you haven't read, turn off this episode now. We are talking this week about Chapter 34, Journey to Salidar, Chapter 35, In the Hall of the Sitters, and Chapter 36, spoiler alert, the Amyrlin is raised. Greg, what did you think about these chapters?
They were great. I mean, something huge happened, and I will not say it was totally unexpected. As the characters remind us within these chapters, it was foretold in some kind of not so serious ways. But it was sudden, and it's a huge change, and it's just crazy. So I'm looking forward to talking through all the kind of ramifications of it with you. But I will say the actual reading of it, it's like it's going to happen, and then it's a lot of reading of rituals and understanding small differences and small actions and small words. It didn't feel like, I thought myself, I was like, well, I want to talk through the big event, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot else to talk about. So we'll see if that proves to be accurate or not.
I think that sounds right. My impression was the first two chapters were really exciting because of what they meant, and not a whole lot kind of happened. And then the third one, I felt like there was maybe a little more meat on those bones, but it's deepening the things that we would have talked about in the first two chapters. So I kind of share your concerns. Everything happens, and this is a big pivot for the book, but I think kind of what we've got to say is like, whoa. And then what happens next?
Is it too much to say it's a big pivot for the series, or is this?
I think
guess
that's
maybe
accurate.
That's spoiler.
Yeah,
I was gonna say because it feels like okay, this sets us on a totally different trajectory, but I could also see how I might have just accidentally asked you if all of this gets undone in 2 chapters or something like that. So it feels huge, and let's celebrate it because it is huge.
Yeah, and I think to some degree this book is probably the book that is full of pivot points for different characters in a lot of ways, right? Nynaeve we saw a week ago when she, or 2 weeks ago when she healed Siwan, felt like just a meaningful moment for her no longer failing at everything. And now we see a big level up. I know that you're thinking I'm talking about Egwene, but I'm talking about Bela. In Chapter 34, Journey to Salidar. Egwene prepares to leave, steadying herself with what she refers to as the heart of an Aiel. She changes into wetlander clothing, and she creates a place using the power where Teleron Riode and the real world are so close to one another in similarity that they are the same. She steps through this gateway into Teleron Riode in the flesh, and she feels a little bit embarrassed that she's doing it despite the Aiel not wanting her to. She creates a dream version of Bela, and then uses her Teleron Riode powers to heal herself from the beating she took in the previous week. Dream Bela be speedy is the way that I wrote this down for some reason, and Egwene remembers the map from the woman with Siwan's name, and as she gets closer, she slows down until eventually she reaches the village of Salidar. She thanks the imaginary Bela and creates another portal into the real world, and immediately feels all of her pain because Teleron Riode can only heal things in Teleron Riode. She then finds someone to direct her to Sheriam, which is actually the same servant as in the previous week, which I found very funny, and she's grumpy about it. Once they arrive at Sheriam's, all 7 of the Aes Sedai in the group are there, and they are shocked that she has come so quickly. They worry about her health after entering Teleron Riode in the flesh, and then they say she needs time to settle, but the young Aes Sedai, who seems to look like Siwan but not quite, says that in the morning the hall will be all over Egwene, and so they have no time. When Siwan uses a fish curse, Egwene eventually recognizes her, and she is shocked that Nynaeve healed Stilling, but even more surprised at how much weaker Siwan is compared to what she expected, which was for Siwan to be the second most powerful person in the room other than Egwene. Egwene then asks after Elaine and Nynaeve, and is told about some of their discoveries. Egwene reasons that the fact that the Aes Sedai are being so positive with her means that she is not going to be exiled or kicked out, and the Aes Sedai begin to answer her questions about Elaine when Siwan butts in, saying they need to stop putting it off, and the Aes Sedai seem furious until Siwan apologizes, but then they turn to Egwene and says that she is going to be the Amyrlin. So, Greg, I just need you to say something about anything other than the last 2 sentences of that chapter, because before that, things happened, I promise. You just don't remember them.
No, I wrote down a lot of things in my notes that I will not say some are that I had questions, some are that they felt important. I did have underlined and in all capitals Bela, because I knew that would make you happy. Yep. Although it did remind me of the old joke from listener Ben, who said that you always say the horse is named Cupcake and I need you to remember that, or something along those lines. So here we get this horse. I mean, I guess we'll just get into Bela discourse.
I was going to say, quick quiz. Do you know where Bela is in the real world?
That's exactly what I was going to ask. Where did we leave Bela? Because, it felt like Bill the Pony, right? Like at some point we just kind of left Bela behind.
So it's worth noting Egwene left Bela behind when she went with Nynaeve and Elaine to Tyr to rescue Rand. So that was in the 3rd book, The Dragon Reborn. But we caught back up with Bela in the 4th book. After being stilled, Siwan, Sancha, and Min need mounts to get out of Tar Valon, and they take a trusty pony that they happen to recognize. It turns out real Bela is exactly where Egwene took Dream Bela. Bela's in Salidar.
Wow. But Egwene doesn't know that.
That is correct.
And I guess Nynaeve might be able to reunite them. She would know both of them anyway.
Yeah, if Nynaeve realized that was the pony that Siwan rode into town, then yes, a connection could be made.
Yeah. Okay, but your tone suggests they're not about to do that. And I guess, I think the other 2 women are about to get to go on their trip, but it doesn't sound like Egwene's going anywhere, maybe ever again. Or maybe to the White Tower eventually.
I think that's exactly the correct read. This feels like a very fun, free moment for Egwene, where she thinks she is getting her last moment of freedom before punishment, but it kind of feels like it's worse than that, even though it's way better than that. You're talking about Bela, which I think is definitely the most important part of this chapter because I love horses. Not really, just Bela. But I also want to note how Egwene gets into Teleron Riode in the flesh, because it is both similar to what Rand described, the idea of taking 2 places and pushing them next to each other and then drilling a hole in it, but it is also very much not like that. It seems more about similarity and sameness than about tearing. And this raises something that we've kind of talked about before. I think what Egwene is identifying is that the 2 sides of the one power don't work quite the same, even though a metaphor about one might be helpful to understanding the other. It was surprising to me how different this was than Rand making gateways.
Yeah, and that was my first note I wanted to backtrack to from Bela, which is just me saying in my notes, this is not how Rand travels, right? So Rand kind of connects the 2 places and goes through a existential blank, right? That's because I remember somebody, some Aiel, I believe, fell off the back of the moving platform and just, I picture them like Adam Scott in Good Place, just falling forever and ever from that moment on. So that sounded right to me, and I'm glad I kind of took the quick read on this. What she did was so much grounded in Teleron Riode that to me it very much felt like an extension of the powers, right? I am never somebody to claim Mary Sue because I think that's terrible and often sexist. But I will say this is like beating the charges explicitly by saying, oh, this isn't some major change in her power structure. It's just using how to use this place a little differently in my mind.
Yeah, and I love the fact that Egwene is kind of using a lot of different things simultaneously. She is thinking about how Rand travels while using the Teleron Riode abilities that the Wise Ones have taught her and doing it through channeling, which she originally learned in the White Tower. And the fact that she kind of blends all those parts of herself to get what is seemingly a new innovation that not even the Wise Ones were aware was really possible, or if they did, they didn't want to learn how. I think it's really fun to see that being the outcome, as you were saying last week, someone who's kind of mastered multiple realms.
Well, and it feels very similar to Nynaeve being able to undo stilling just by thinking about things from a slightly different angle. I mean, big prequel Jedi vibes where the Aes Sedai are like, this is just how it's always been done. Why would we do it any differently? And fail to see all these kind of very simple changes that could make everybody's lives easier.
So I think after that, I'm supposed to spend most of my time watching the Aes Sedai and trying to figure out what they're up to and thinking about how some of them are much more diplomatic and others are trying to bowl over Egwene and what have you. But honestly, mostly what I have to focus on is the woman with Siwan's face, who is completely unrecognizable until she swears about fish, and then immediately Egwene is like, oh, hey, that's Siwan.
Oh, now you're hitting the third of my bullet points. So no, we can't say we're doing them in order, but we are hitting all those topics. So this remains a little confusing to me, and I assume it's supposed to.
Yes, that is intentional.
And then we have the extra complication of we know a little bit more from the TV show, but as always, I'm like, is that exactly how it works here? Did it translate? Does it not translate? Because there are sometimes changes.
I would love to hear your understanding of this then, so I can correct any crossed streams issues.
So let me just make sure I understand this right. Let's talk books only first. So Siwan in the room appears much, much younger than the last time Egwene saw her. And Egwene essentially says she was an old lady, right? I don't think like decrepit old woman, but, you know, leathery skin.
Be careful. The Aes Sedai have ageless faces. So Aes Sedai between the ages of 30 and 200, the way that it's described in the book is like you can't put a age to them. They look both old and young simultaneously. So it's not quite she was old and decrepit, but it was she had that Aes Sedai face so thoroughly she could have been 200 and you never would have known it.
Okay, and so then when she got stilled, that's the right one for her. No.
That is correct.
Yes, stilled. Essentially, that ageless face went away, and she appeared as she does essentially the moment she was recruited.
Yes.
Kind of. So it's like you got your Hogwarts letter, you got a new face and you stayed the same age forever. But when you got kicked out of Hogwarts, you went back to the 11-year-old getting the letter. I don't know why I went to Hogwarts, but sure.
Yeah, that's sans transphobia. That is exactly correct. I think that the one complication that I want to, or the two complications I want to add on top of this are, one, that Siwan's ageless face did not come back when she regained her channeling ability, and so it is not purely a function of how long you have channeled. The other thing to note here is that wise ones do seem to age differently than people who are not wise ones, but they never get the Aes Sedai face. They just age more slowly. So I think that this what is going on with Siwan and Lyanna's face thing is actually part of like a deeper mystery about why does it seem like the Aes Sedai age so weirdly even compared to other channelers.
And then the last complication from the TV show I remembered is we went into the house of Moraine's sister, who was a very old woman, and showed a picture of a portrait of Moraine that she's like, this is us from 40 years ago, or you from 40 years ago, and she looked exactly the same, right?
Yes.
So we're meant to interpret that she either already had the ageless face there, or her ageless face is just closer to what she looked like in her youth.
Yeah, so this is one difference between the television show and the books, is that the television show was very outright in the first season. They were like, look, we just cannot afford to have every single female character have CGI to make their face look ageless in every shot. It's just not possible. And so in the television show, they simply have them kind of stay at approximately 30 forever instead of getting this like weird old and young face. But the premise is the same, that Moraine at 30 would look the same as Moraine at 70 because she has this Aes Sedai ageless face, and so you could probably take a painting of her at 25 and it would look almost the same as her at whatever age. Now, it is also worth noting we get a little more detail in this chapter, or maybe the following one about Siwan. She was the youngest Amyrlin prior to Egwene and was raised at age 30. We know that she was not a Merlin when Rand was born 20 years ago, so that puts Siwan's age probably like late 30s, early 40s, depending on how long it took her to secure the Amyrlin throne after Rand's birth. So for Moraine and Siwan, it's worth noting they became Aes Sedai around age 20. They were kind of working for 20-ish years until age 40, and they now have the Aes Sedai face to such a degree that you would not know whether they were 40 or 20 or 100.
Okay. That all makes sense to me, and yeah, obviously you couldn't CG every Aes Sedai for my immediate reaction when you said that in the middle of your comments. I'm not ignoring the end of your comments, but it was like, oh, and you'd have to get rid of Leandrin's cheekbones, and that would just be a crime.
You could not do it. Yeah,
that'd be a crime.
Illegal. Absolutely. I think then the only thing that I have other than ageless face weirdness, right? That's a mystery that we don't have a good answer to, but we're piecing together clues slowly but surely. I think all that we're kind of left with then is the revelation at the end of the chapter, right? Siwan says you need to get on with it. It has to happen now. And what has to happen now is she's going to be raised to be the Amyrlin immediately. I'm just curious. Obviously, there's a lot more detail about what this means and what it looks like in the next couple chapters. But what was your initial response to reading this? I know you had predicted this as a down-the-road thing. How shocked were you to see it come, I'm assuming, books earlier than you anticipated?
Very shocked. I don't need to front in any way. I mean, I think I did not understand that somebody this young could be raised. And I guess very much in line with Egwene, well, this is more the next chapter, where it's like, wait, I can't just skip over that step, right? Of becoming an actual Aes Sedai, which gets covered next chapter. But pretty shocking. And then I had that kind of nagging feeling like, oh, it must not really happen. And then obviously by the end of tonight, we know it does actually
it really happened.
Yeah. So it seems like a desperate move, right? So, I mean, it seems really dorky to say this, but if this were happening in the real world, right, which the equivalent would be like a political party out of power that's like, got it, we'll put all our hopes on this person who is barely old enough to become president. And it's not that hasn't happened before, right? Despite current precedent, we don't just pick really, really old people. We can, pick anybody, what is it, 35, I think, to be president? And
let's be real. We are describing the Barack Obama story.
Yeah, essentially.
That man was a senator 8 years before he was president of the U.S.
And yeah, I mean, while he did end up serving in the Senate, it does feel like he skipped that step in some ways that are equivalent here. So it seems like, but it feels a little desperate. Like we're going outside of our traditions because we know things have gone quite wrong. So we need this outsider perspective. Yeah. It's very interesting to compare this then to the fact that she was told directly that she would be welcomed back, right? Like she is considered a wise one by them. And I have to wonder if that would change or be the same now that she got a big promotion at work.
Yeah, and I think that this also just reveals a couple of like weird itty-bitty mysteries we had before. I think like a couple of months ago, we had heard things like the Aes Sedai were waiting for a biddable child that they could control. It sure makes sense now that they think Egwene is not someone who's going to be able to stand up to them. So I think this kind of fills in a lot of conversations that Nynaeve and Elaine have been trying to figure out about why is Salidar not going anywhere. Turns out they've been waiting for Egwene to get over her headaches.
Cool.
Let's move on to chapter 35, In the Hall of the Sitters. Egwene thinks it is a joke and then says that she is not Aes Sedai, but then realizes that they are all serious. Bianin explains a loophole in Tower law that the Amyrlin is Aes Sedai, but need not be an Aes Sedai in order to be raised to the Amyrlin. It turns out that the Hall sees the law in the same way as they do, so it's legal. She apparently will speak the 3 oaths, but not until they can return to the Tower and have her swear them on the oath rod. And then Egwene thinks of numerous objections that she has to this plan, before eventually saying that she wouldn't know what to do, and then she says that she will say no. Apparently, according to the law, that is not an option. Now that she has been nominated, it is in the Tower's hands, and Sheriam assures her that she will have someone to advise her on what to do. Egwene then has my favorite line in the series thus far: maybe obeying the law wasn't being bullied, but it felt the same. And then preparations begin to have her learn all of the ceremony and know what to do as this process happens. At this point, an accepted dress is brought so that she is not wearing clothing that would be unacceptable for her station, and then they make her learn all of her parts, which she memorizes quickly, and she is surprised by how much they make her repeat it, given that that never would be necessary among the wise ones. At this point, she is led through the town to the little tower, and Anaya is the one who reassures her before they enter. Inside, there are 18 sitters and a large chair, which is standing in for the Amyrlin seat. The ceremony begins with Egwene repeating the words she was told, and then the women all get naked, because Robert Jordan, and then Sheriam's group back Egwene, and she is asked what she seeks. Egwene sees it as a point of no return, but eventually she says she seeks the Amyrlin seat. 9 of the sitters immediately rise, signifying their accession, but the other 9 make a point of not standing. At this point, she ceremonially washes the feet of all of the sitters, asking to be allowed to serve. She wonders how much all of this was pre-planned in terms of who stood and who sat, and Ramonda and Lelaine are the last to stand in a second round of voting, but eventually they do. Once they both rise, Egwene is officially the Amyrlin, and as she has begun to discuss the issues, she laughs and then has to apologize to the women who she now refers to as daughters. At this point, the sitters kiss her ring, repeating the same admonition that Egwene had to say about wanting to serve, and apparently the women line up in age order, which seems odd to Egwene. At this point, Egwene is left alone with Sheriam's group, and she asked what would have happened if Ramonda had stayed sitting, and she is told that likely she would have been exiled because you can't have an accepted who is almost the Amyrlin seat. At this point, Sheriam offers to fill her in on the happenings of Salidar, and Egwene eagerly agrees. So I think this is the chapter you described before as a bunch of ceremony, and that's 100% accurate. I don't have anything to say about the middle 2/3 of this chapter. What did you think of in the Hall of the Sitters, other than, oh, hey, they're naked again?
I actually didn't catch that they were naked again. I don't know why I skimmed that over or
they
blacked that out. They
literally take off their shirts and go, I am a woman.
Man. I mean, middle school Greg is so mad at middle-aged Greg right now because I was picturing this totally wrong. Well, now I feel like I can't say what I was going to say, but I will say it anyway.
I just want to point out that, as Eleanor Shellstrop would say, you can imagine them topless even if they're not. No one can stop you.
It's always free. Yeah. So I actually kind of liked the idea of the ritual of like, yes, we all will reach the agreement eventually, but we need some to reject it so that you have to humble yourself. Like, I mean, I don't think there's any literal connection to like the Catholic Church or any major groups like that. Although feet washing is certainly a part of many rituals within the church and multiple churches, right? There's something very humbling about kneeling at somebody's feet and bathing, the dirtiest part. Well, I guess not the dirtiest part, but essentially the dirtiest part of them. So I did like that part. I want to ask a couple questions about that, but we should probably talk about the start is again, a little bit what we already covered, which is just like, don't worry about it. We can hand wave. There's a loophole. It's totally fine that you aren't Aes Sedai yet.
I will say, as a teenage reader who was really into debate, I loved Bianin and her argument about the Amyrlin is always a Aes Sedai, but you don't have to be Aes Sedai to be Amyrlin. And that's the kind of flimsy loophole that I think appealed to me to some degree, as it makes sense logically and I hate it. And then the
Yeah.
other thing that I noted here, which doesn't have any real-world allegory, is the idea that if the Amyrlin and the Congress agree on what the law is, that's just the law. Like, it doesn't matter what the law actually says. It's just what everyone agrees it means.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think there's anything technically equivalent to that in our politics. I was trying to think about, like, you can't just confer citizenship.
There is.
Right? Is there? What am I missing?
I believe, and I think this is a gray area that is not entirely clear, there are people who are not eligible for the presidency who would be eligible to be vice president and thus would create a weird could they become president, right? I think, for example, a 29-year-old could be nominated for VP. I could be wrong about that, but things like that.
And what would then happen if they had to take over the role? Interesting. It's silly, but I remember when I was a high schooler, God, what I think this would be the '04 campaign when General Wesley Clark ran. He came to New Hampshire and I saw him speak, and he was like, he was basically pointing out people in New Hampshire, you can see every single presidential candidate. Like, it doesn't take much effort to see them all, like whoever you want to see. And he was pointing out what a luxury that is. And he's like, I never in my life saw a presidential candidate until I started running and looked in the mirror. And it always struck me as a funny comment that, like, yeah, it is just one of those things that you can kind of like endorse yourself as this, this new entity and then claim, yes, I saw a presidential candidate one time, despite, again, my privilege just soaking through that I saw everybody in that election year, I think.
I mean, let's be honest. The reason I pointed to Barack Obama earlier is because my wife has a campaign thing that he signed from his Senate campaign. So, yeah, we're very privileged with all of our privilege. I do also like the moment where Egwene is like, wait, I had no say in being nominated, and I have no say in whether my nomination goes through. I think the line, like, following the law and being bullied feel exactly the same, also has no allegories in our real world.
Well, and the pairing of that, like, I'm going to stand up against them, and then the kind of coda at the end of the chapter that's like, oh, yeah, so if this hadn't worked out, you would have to go, we would have to go, everybody would have to go. I mean, it's not quite that, but it's like, oh, geez, like good thing they worked it out and that they were all eager to find consensus.
Yeah, and I really appreciated, I think it was early in this chapter, maybe even bleeding in from the previous chapter, just all of the ways that Egwene notices the Aes Sedai are nervous and they have all this like tension energy. I thought it was really fun seeing these otherwise very composed women like just running around and asking her the same question 5 times, and it kind of read well. I understood what the mood of the room was. And then we have a naked ceremony. Did you have any thoughts on the ceremony?
Well, I mean, again, I don't do as good a job as you, but I tried to note that we have the two who kind of lead those that object, right?
Yes, Lelaine and Ramonda.
So it's like 18 sitters, and she only gets 9 the first round?
Correct.
Is that right? Felt very conclave, right? Like every round of that movie. And so I immediately was like, oh, must be troublemakers. And they can be, but Ramonda is a yellow and Lelaine is a blue.
That is correct.
So these are not traditionally who we worry about, right?
Yeah.
We kind of, obviously we hate Black Aja. We don't trust red because they're always a little iffy.
Yeah.
And green are a little not as bad as red, but yeah, I don't know. I gotta keep an eye on them. And so yellow and blue, those are like our mainstays, our healers and our Gryffindors, right?
Yep.
And they were the ones who objected.
Well, and I think that we've seen this before in Salidar, that there are seemingly a whole bunch of different camps that maybe like overlap and have similar interests. And it feels like Ramonda and Lelaine are really kind of settled into the positions of kind of being in charge of whatever the biggest 2 groups are. And I think it's very telling that the moment doesn't seem to be a stare down with Lelaine deciding that she's okay with Egwene and Ramonda deciding she's okay with Lelaine. It's almost them staring each other down more than it is about the person actually being decided, right? I think it's described that Lelaine stands up and literally shrugs and then walks over to the rest of the Aes Sedai. Like, this is about those 2 much more than it is about Egwene. And I think that that's really telling of both how powerful they consider themselves, that they can kind of brush off the future Amyrlin seat, and also tells us a lot about the rivalry between those two, even though we haven't seen it much at all.
And so let me just try to summarize what you just said back to you to make sure I got it. So the internal politics of Salidar are what we should ascribe this objection to primarily, that these are the leaders of another faction that essentially lost the race to get their good candidate and get them called and all that before this faction.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like from the way that those two stared off, my read is something along the lines of they both either wanted to be the Amyrlin or wanted to be the person behind the Amyrlin, and it kind of feels like Romonda couldn't get what she wanted because of Lelaine, and Lelaine couldn't get what she wanted because of Romonda, so let's just go with what Sheriam wanted.
Okay.
So that all happens. And then I think my favorite part of the chapter is Egwene laughing at the absurdity of what has just happened and then having to apologize to the women around her while calling them daughter and then immediately going back to doing everything they say. It was just funny to me.
So I have this thing I hate. I actually don't go to Walmart much anymore. It's actually kind of hard to go to Walmart if you wanted to around Boston. But the Walmart famously had the greeters, maybe they still do, right? Who are usually like an old retiree or often a special needs adult, but particularly the old retirees who are there. And, you know, their job is a little bit inventory protection, but mostly just to greet you and say, welcome to Walmart. And at some point in my mid-20s, they started calling me sir. And I felt like this is everything wrong in America, right? That we're making this, 70-year-old has to have a job for whatever reason. And not only that, but we're going to make it so they have to call me, some chucklehead, seeing if they have the right Star Wars plastic figurines in the back, sir. And it felt like that like she's now calling them daughters and they have to call her mother, even though there's this like extreme age but experience gap and skill level gap. It's just like, man, this is nuts. So I liked that she laughed, because that's often how I felt, though I never did laugh in the face of a Walmart greeter.
I, on the other hand, have probably laughed at a lot of Walmart greeters, not in a mean way, just in a like, what in the world is happening in this place? Because Walmart is a different world.
It is.
I do not have too much else here. I think it's very interesting to see Sheriam and Egwene interact after this, simply because Egwene is kind of, if we're describing Romaine and Lolanda as the big power players and Sheriam as kind of the pivot between them, that's leaving out Egwene, who feels like she has no one. And so this is going to be a very important relationship for her.
I'm pretty sure you just said Romaine and Lolanda, which is hilarious.
That's much funnier. Yeah.
Because it sounds like something I would do.
Yes.
And I only clocked it because I was like, Romaine? Like the lettuce? That's not right.
I probably did say that, and honestly, better than the names in the book. Any last thoughts on this chapter?
I mean, the key thing is that it's done. It happened. It's there. She gets through the ritual. It doesn't take 5 votes of the conclave. It takes kind of a perfunctory one, and then there's consensus. And, oh my God, we have a new Amyrlin seat. That is nuts.
And she is raised in chapter 36. Egwene is introduced to her new maid, Chesa, who is also given the best accommodations in Salidar, although they're still kind of dingy. The Aes Sedai inform her of the embassy to Rand and others to many other monarchs around the continent, which seem to be their most important priority. She also gets the basics of the military situation and also of Loghain's restoration. Sheriam is sure that Loghain's issue will never be settled by the Tower, and so she can make a decision, and both Romonda and Lelaine stop by with advice for the Amyrlin and also offers of guidance. Egwene, at this point, tries to sleep and dreams of her trip through the Terangriel when she was the Amyrlin without swearing the oaths. At this point, Egwene chooses a dress after she wakes and lies to her maid about the source of her bruises. Chesa is overly talkative and seemingly thrilled to be the Amyrlin's maid, and as she comes downstairs, everyone curtsies to Egwene, and she is reminded of the speech that she has to give. Eventually, Egwene is announced to the village and raised up high on a pillar of air, and she begins giving the speech as it was originally given to her, denouncing Elida. But then she skips most of the middle of the speech, which she thinks of as repetitive, and then names Sheriam as her keeper, seemingly upsetting both Ramonda and Lelaine, who potentially wanted to be the keeper, or at least had other candidates. She then declares that novices and accepted are absolved of all punishment, and then does something not planned by anyone who gave her the speech, which is to declare Theodrin, Faulain, Elaine, and Nynaeve to all be full Aes Sedai. Egwene then finishes her speech to thunderous applause as Sheriam quickly takes her to her study. Sheriam says that the sitters all drafted the speech, which causes Egwene to realize that's why it was so terrible, and Egwene then dismisses the concern when both Sheriam, Ramonda, and Lelaine all object to the idea of raising accepted to full Aes Sedai. Egwene says that it is necessary in order to normalize her being similarly raised to Aes Sedai, and both Lelaine and Ramonda warn Egwene of breaking with Tower tradition and potentially breaking the law. Egwene promises to consult with them in the future and dismisses them. Sheriam says that Egwene must rely on her and her group for advice, and Egwene sends her to get Elaine and Nynaeve. Egwene notes the empty desk in her room and realizes that no one has any real plans to let her make any decisions, and then at this point Elaine and Nynaeve arrive, and Egwene insists that they not treat her like the Amyrlin, at least when they are in private. They agree, and Nynaeve notes that some of the Aes Sedai are actually ignoring her announcement and continuing to treat Nynaeve as an accepted rather than a full Aes Sedai. At this point, she insists that they talk, and she learns of Loghain's healing and also of Elaine creating Terangriel, but they give no other details about any of their other discoveries. At this point, they discuss Rand and Min's impending arrival to Caemlyn. Egwene notes how Elaine seems jealous of Min and is somewhat confused by this. When Egwene tells Elaine that Rand has plans for her in Caemlyn and Cairhien, Elaine seems upset, saying that Rand should not offer something that is already hers, or at least she has a claim to. Egwene tries to reassure her, but is told that it may not matter what Rand meant when he made the declaration. The girls then say that as Aes Sedai, they can go wherever they want to, and they tell Egwene about the bowl that can change the weather, and also their lie to try to tie it to Rand. Egwene then says that she will do what she can, and Elaine and Nynaeve seem surprised at the idea that she won't be able to get anything that she wants done. Egwene explains that she knows she was chosen to be a figurehead for those behind her, and she needs to be known by the other leaders and established in order to prevent anyone from moving against her before it is known that she has been raised to the Amyrlin seat. Elaine says that she plans Egwene says that she plans to pretend to be used by whoever's opinions are closest to her own, and then when she eventually can do something directly, she will finally be able to strike. She tells Elaine and Nynaeve that she may have discovered a way to shorten their trip to Ibudar substantially, and they begin to plan for how to move forward. I found this to be the most fun of the 3 chapters. Planning is just way more fun than ceremony, no matter how many naked women there are in the ceremony. Greg, stop talking about these naked ladies. What did you think of chapter 36?
I'm just listening to bare naked ladies. I wasn't doing anything. I think that's right. And I guess my thesis for this chapter is we've talked a lot about how hard it is to lead and what kind of leader you're going to be. And that's been focused on Rand and also a little on Elaine. I mean, I don't think she's gotten a chance to really show it, but we've seen hints at the kind of leader she's going to be. And now we suddenly have a third character who gets elevated to this, I should say raised, who gets raised to this position and is like hitting the ground pretty savvy as a leader, I would say. That's the impression I got from this chapter, that she's making a conservative set of moves to act in the ways she thinks can consolidate her power and protect her and keep her powder dry for the big conflicts ahead. And I don't know, that feels like a major power upgrade for Egwene. So that's great. And I mean that all positively, right?
Yeah.
It's great to see her take that on and to be that smart. There's a nice little nod somewhere. I don't remember in regards to what action, but she's like, I kind of listened when Moraine was helping Rand. And it's like, oh, yeah, like she was getting mentored in much the same way and has also just been a witness to people governing for a while now, Rand and the wise ones and so on. So I think it's great. And I think she proves herself up to the task of this. She's not going to be fully entrapped by it.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up exactly the same moment where I really expected if Egwene was going to be so successful, it would because she was emulating the wise ones. It felt like that was kind of her most recent kind of leadership. But to hear her say, yeah, I maybe learned more from Moraine than Rand did, I think is kind of really telling of how much these characters who are in the background of some of the scenes will end up pulling things away from it that we really don't expect them to. And I thought that was a really telling moment. I also thought it was really interesting to get Egwene kind of filtering through what was she asking follow-ups about and what was she kind of ignoring. It seemed like she was very interested in Rand and his interactions with the world and didn't really have much concern for the things going on in Salidar directly. Was that your read as well, or were there any of these updates that kind of struck you as interesting?
Yeah, I think they all felt kind of where we'd expect it to be. Actually, I'll make an Obama connection too. Do you remember like the morning after Obama was elected, he got his first like CIA briefing or whatever, and everybody's like, "Tell us all the secrets," and it's like, "No, I'm not gonna do that. That's not what they do, right?" Yeah. But it was like this feeling that he was so of the people that like suddenly he's gonna let us all in on this, and you know. Yeah, that's not to diminish his relationship with his constituents eventually, but it was like not going to be that, right? And I actually think the right experienced that too, where it's like President Trump's going to shake everything up. He's going to tell us what's really in Area 51, and he's going to tell us who really killed Kennedy and all those things. And I mean, he's pretended at some of those things, but it's not really like what a president does, or there aren't those secrets to let us in on.
And I think that this chapter both does a really good job, as you say, of kind of giving us some of these like, no, that's not how it works moments. And I think my favorite one of them is Egwene being like, so what's going on with Lelaine? I'm sorry, not Lelaine, with Logain. And the response that is given by Sheriam is like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll be debating about that until you die. Like, it's really accurate to me to have someone be like, look, there are issues in politics that matter and issues in politics that you talk about. And Logain's an issue you talk about. And I thought that was kind of funny and also telling of what Salidar is like, right? It's a place that's dysfunctional enough that even though it has a brand new government, it's already not getting things done.
Yeah. And like the fact that Egwene can hear those things, recognize them, and still try to start to scheme again shows me how savvy she is. So it seems to me the smartest thing she does is elevate these four girls because for women, I shouldn't always default to girls.
I actually found myself in this chapter changing girls to not mean Egwene, Elaine, and Nynaeve, but just mean Elaine and Nynaeve. I was like, I'm sorry, Egwene is not a girl anymore. I've upgraded her.
So she elevates them as a way to make it so there are no questions about her power, but also just wants to take care of her friends. Yeah. Now, my concern in that is the other two, right? Because we have some nasty parties hanging out in Salidar, and are these the two that we sense darkness around?
So it's worth noting there were two separate viewings by Min, and I want to pull them apart. So one viewing was of Merrigan and the two other, I think it was like Nicola and Irena. And that was like the super dark, like bad things will happen vision. That was likely because Merrigan was the disguise that Moghedien was using. But there was also the other viewing of They Will Be Trouble for You. And I think that was Nicola and Irena, not Theodrin and Fowlane. But I think way back in the second book, Min did have a viewing of them as just like, they're not good people or they'll be irritating or something minor like that. So I don't think that we have gotten the like, they are a Forsaken in hiding, although they very well could be. But it certainly feels like these have been more antagonists than anything else, at least for Elaine and Nynaeve, since they've arrived in Salidar.
Well, and they're the political cover. I'm not just taking care of my two besties. I also have these other two randos, right? Yeah, I mean, back when people questioned presidential power, that used to happen with pardons, right? Like, you know, I think Jimmy Carter Bill Clinton slid in his brother, right? And like packaged it up with three other really worthy pardons at that moment. So nobody hopefully noticed or what have you.
Yeah, so. I think it was actually really fun in the narration. Egwene is like, oh yeah, I'm really glad someone mention Faulain and Theodrin, because otherwise this would seem really bad. Like, it was just an offhand comment that gave her 2 more names, and I thought that was accurate.
So I guess then where I'm kind of left is Egwene edits this speech on the fly. She's taking out repetition, and that is the piece that later on it feels like Ramonda and Lillian are frustrated about, but it also feels like the best kind of illustration of her knowing who she's speaking to, right? She gets a thunderous applause at the end of it, and I don't think that's entirely not because she only spoke for 5 minutes instead of 20, right? So
yeah,
I think she's showing really great instincts here.
I mean, it felt like Leslie Knope when her teleprompter goes off in her victory speech and she can still deliver, right? It's like we're having it demonstrated. This is somebody who really knows what they're doing and will apply those skills. So yeah, I'm very much higher on Egwene chapters than I was, right? Because and it is because something has actually happened. She was kind of stalled out for a book or so, and not this book so far, but
totally.
And now it's like not only is like something super crazy happening, but she's becoming a much richer character by showing that. And I mean, it's the classic Aaron Sorkin, like competent people doing things competently is like riveting to me.
And I really love what it does to change her relationship with Elaine and Nynaeve once they arrive.
Because not only do we get that kind of really delicious, like, I know that I am your superior, but please treat me like your friend unless we're in public, and then, like, you gotta treat me like your superior. But it's also really fun to see Egwene kind of, how am I trying to put this? She is piecing together what the girls are doing and what they've been discovering, and you can tell that she knows there is more to the story and doesn't know how to ask it. And it was really fun watching Elaine and Nynaeve dance around Mogadien and Egwene partially put it together but be missing just enough pieces she doesn't know what the other discoveries are.
Yeah, I mean, I like the dynamic that was established in both regards, right? So, again, in Star Wars, because that's my home language, it felt like Padme and her handmaidens, right? Which that's a mythology that's not very present in the Phantom Menace, but has been deeply expanded in books and comics. And it's like, yeah, they're just like a bunch of best friends behind the scenes, and then they have to kind of put on this ceremony and these rituals in front of everybody, and so they act that way. And I liked thinking of, Suan had Moraine. That's, more, I was going to say it's implied it's romantic. It's outright romantic in the television show, right?
Yeah.
And so it's nice to think that, you want to believe that the people in power have their confidants that they can be themselves around and kind of let off that steam. But then, and she says that's what she wants, and then it almost immediately is turned on its head, as you were saying, with like, but unfortunately, the new roles and the time spent apart means there's some barriers here and some things they all can't be completely themselves about, and that's intriguing, right?
Yeah.
The desire to be as close as you can be and the reality that you can't give everything away is really interesting.
Yeah, and I thought it was really telling how it seems like Elaine is leaping at the places she can be open, right? She not only tells Egwene about the bowl that can control the weather, but also is like, look, we straight up lied to all the sitters, don't tell on us. And I thought that kind of idea that she is a complete open book except is a much more interesting place than kind of being really reserved or really open. And we'd kind of been in that binary mode before, and shades of gray are just way more fun when it comes to issues like this. Other than that, I thought it was just really fun to see Egwene be like, I'm going to do what I can for you, but I don't think I can even get you to Ibu Dar. I don't know if I have that much power yet. And her kind of thinking through what can she do and how can she accomplish things with no power was a really interesting way to kind of leave this chapter. It's really kind of fun to think of all of the options that are available to her, but she doesn't get to control which ones will actually be available.
Well, and I think it's really important that Robert Jordan puts those limits in immediately, because they would have felt like retcons later. Like, oops, I gave too much power, I got to roll that back. But it's like, no, let's make it very clear that this promotion does not mean she's all powerful and can do whatever she wants and act fully in Rand's interest or anybody else's interest at this time. So I think that was very smart as a writer to put that in here and let us see how it plays out. And, I think it's inevitable that Rand and Egwene will eventually bump heads. I think that's a secondary problem. Egwene's got to get back in the White Tower and claim the actual Amyrlin seat, right? Because it is a person and a seat.
That is accurate, yeah.
Yeah, that will be the only way that people will really believe she's who she now is. So,
and
it's
Greg
exciting.
believes that will happen in how many books?
I think she's gonna get to the White Tower next book. Her and Rand will fight in 3 books. I don't know.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
just guessing.
Good prediction. Just wanted to get something on the record. That's all I needed. Next week, we will continue our push to read a bunch more, because that's how we want to do it. And it will be a slightly long week, but not as bad as we've had in the past month or so. It will be 3 chapters. That is Chapter 37, When Battle Begins, Chapter 38, A Sudden Chill, and Chapter 39, Possibilities. And I don't know whether they are all with the same POVs, but it's worth noting When Battle Begins, I'm pretty sure is at least some of the same characters early on. So, Greg, what do you want as we continue with this now exciting plotline?
I liked A Sudden Chill as a chapter name because I'm like, oh, good, they get the bowl and solve the problem. Oops, they just pick it up and like a cold northern wind comes down through the continent. I'm excited. Yes, I just was checking in my paperback as Tylor read those, and it's 40 pages even in my mass market paperback, which also brings us to 742, which is pretty darn close to the end. I mean, we're in that last 300 pages as of, I think, this coming reading. Because I think mine is like 1013 is the number of pages in this edition, not counting the index. So like, this is usually when we're just moving full throttle. And certainly after this week, I think we could be. And we have a lot of characters seemingly, to speak it like Revenge of the Sith, there's that part in the middle of the movie, the part of that movie you fall asleep during, which is everybody gets moved around and put where they need to, so then you can have the big climactic finale and all the action. So I think we're done moving pieces around. Let's just get the action and let's see what happens. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but either way, we'll be here to help you talk about it and to correct me on all the things I get wrong through the glass columns.